I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've got it back yet. So let's, where's, oh my gosh. So YouTube has, Zoom has done its update. So I'm totally on the back foot here. Live stream here. Okay. Here we go. Hannah's done the thing. So for the first time in quite a while, we are actually live on LinkedIn. Did it give you the thing? Did you get to say got it?
Yeah.
So it looks like we are here live on LinkedIn and recording to discuss in this week's QT conversation. Thursdays, 11 a.m. is QT Conversation, Qualified Tutors' opportunity to explore the big ideas in tutoring. And today we are stepping into a minefield. I'm nothing if not brave. We haven't been on LinkedIn for quite a while, so I feel that this is going to be a juicy one. If Qualified Tutor members are noticing us on LinkedIn popping up, please come into the room. We want to hear your voices. If you are following on LinkedIn because you're not yet a community member, why not? But of course, you can drop your insights and thoughts in the chat because we want to hear them. So let's get started. Our topic for today, we've been discussing online tutoring. We've been discussing educating online and what that's meant to us. And initially we know that, firstly, we know that tutoring has adapted to online education much, much faster than the rest of the education space, simply because we're more agile. We tend to be our own decision makers. And the scope of leading change is much smaller when it's just you or just a small team. And serving your students becomes, the entire focus. There's just less admin entailed with adopting online. We know that for tutors, online tutoring is a game changer, firstly because it saves us turnaround time. So just not traveling to the student's house and back can double your capacity for earning, because every half hour there and back is another hour that you could be tutoring. So those of us who do 55-minute sessions so that we give ourselves 5 minutes for a quick rest break to switch on to the next one and do back-to-back are very, very used to that cadence now of working. And we can do 4 hours back-to-back in the evening, or as we're going to discuss in a second, we could tutor students online so we can actually reach them all through the day as well. So that's the next benefit of online education. We know that it allows us to work with students internationally, which means that tutors can work round the clock. So when I was starting out in tutoring, it was only antisocial hours, which is to say the same hours that my kids needed me was the time that students were available to work with me, which made the job of tutoring slightly less easy to work around my family life, which was, of course, why I was tutoring in the first place. I was looking for a flexible role. So those antisocial hours were difficult. And I know more than one tutor who has really developed an international practice because they were solving this problem. Maybe they were the only parent at home. They needed to make sure that they were available for their young children. So they couldn't work with students after school. They needed to find students who wanted to work with them during what in GMT is the working day. So those are students who may be in China or in India. You're hearing the stretch of my geography now because I know nothing about time zones. But what we're going to do together is we're going to begin to explore what that's looking like. So we've said that online education is awesome because it increases our capacity. It increases our reach. It increases our flexibility. There's also something really interesting, and certainly from the parent side, this is true, about access and about supply and demand and how those things affect pay rates. So a tutor who is working in person nowadays tends to charge more than a tutor working online, simply because there is a smaller pool of people available to tutor maths in Edgware after school than there are tutors across the UK or beyond available to deliver that same session. So parents now find that they are paying a premium for in-person tutoring, which means that online tutoring tends to be more affordable. Online tutoring tends to be more affordable. Now, for us as tutors, we need to make sure that we are making a comfortable living wage. But for us as educators, we are also passionate about making sure that the best kind of teaching and learning, which we believe is tutoring, is available to as many young people as possible. And so there is this balance that we're constantly trying to create between, I need to earn what I need to earn, but I want to be there for the students who really need me. So we're talking about access from the point of view of the tutor and the point of view of the student. And we're talking about how online tutoring has made tutoring more accessible, more affordable, more flexible, more convenient for both the tutor and the family, the student and the family around them. I can tell you, getting personal here for a second. One of my kids is at home at the moment for the foreseeable future. And I discovered this on Monday. And by Tuesday afternoon, I had built out an entire online tuition schedule for him. So he's now, and that costs a lot, but it doesn't necessarily cost a lot as much as you would think. And I will save in other ways. But he will now have one-to-one tuition in maths, science, English, and history, which is his favorite subject, every week until we place him in a new school. And I was able to make that happen in moments. Firstly, because I know the best tutors in the world. And if you want to know them too, then go to the qualified tutor directory. Secondly, because they were daytime hours. So the tutors had availability. If I'd asked them for after school hours, it would have been a different story. And thirdly, because by working with him online, the whole project is more affordable. If I was looking for people in my local community, I'd probably be paying double per hour, which is not okay, but those are North London prices, and I wouldn't do that. I just don't think that that's a realistic. I don't think I think it's too much pressure actually on everyone, on the child, on the tutor, and on me to be paying, £80 or above rates per hour. So I'm paying a fair amount of money for an incredible service that's going to change my child's life whilst he's at home. But what I have never done, and what you guys all do, is international tutoring. Because back when I was tutoring, it was mostly in person. And I think that I'm just going to take the role of the curious here and hear from you guys in terms of where you are in the world, because we have at least 3 different countries represented in this room, and more local areas as well. And I think that it's going to be interesting to explore cultural norms, cultural expectations. Let's just hit on a few of those top topics, and then I'm going to open the floor. So what do parents expect? What do parents expect from education? Right? The educational goals of the parent. What do parents expect from a tutor? As an educator, as a freelancer, what kind of relationship do you have in terms of power balance, in terms of authority? Where is the power balance in a relationship between you and the parent, and how does that differ in different countries? Then we've got the expectations of the student. So work ethic of the student, does that differ in different countries? I'd also like to know about the attitude to different subjects. So do you find that your student has a different attitude towards maths, or English as an additional language, or art, or philosophy, and everything in between? Again, what are the educational goals of the student? And are you clear about those goals? And then there are the unspoken curricula. So I once spoke with a tutor who said that the parents that she works with expect really slick tech because they work in the tech world, and by being really confident with her tech, she's signaling competence across the board. Okay, so there are different signals that are going on here. There are different power relationships, there are different educational goals, and all of those things need to be navigated respectfully. And this is where the minefield piece comes in. Okay, it's one thing for me to jokingly tell you that my geography is non-existent and my time zones are a mess, but if I had a child in a specific location that I wasn't familiar with, I would certainly gain some context, right? So the context around the child is important because you have to build relationship with that child. And we know, and this is my final point, and I think this might be the most important point, we know that as tutors, it's on us to go to where they are. In every sense, the reason why tutoring is so effective is because we go to where they are. We go to where they are in sense of their topics and the learning, what they know and can do. We go to where they are in terms of accessibility, online tutoring, landing in their living room, even though we are on the other side of the world. And we go to where they are in terms of their norms and their culture. We do not expect them to accommodate us and come to us. We know that our role is to go to them. That's why they need a tutor. So I have basically presented an entire thesis on tutoring, and now it's up to you. Dee, I'd love to hear from your thoughts first.
My international journey began through desperation to fill my afternoon availability because I could only generate so much income by teaching UK students after school. And that's why I made contact with a business, and that's now why I have students that I work with in the Middle East. And I must admit, it's an interesting thing because I don't feel completely in control of the relationship with the parents because they haven't come to me direct. So it's been a
Thank you. Hold
slow
on
and
1 second. So that's absolutely right. I forgot to mention the culture of the agency. Absolutely right.
so and I wasn't, it's the first time I'd worked through a business with connecting with students. So I didn't really know what to expect. I hadn't really thought through what the implications of that might be. So was very much feeling my way initially, and feeling a bit on the back foot and a bit unsure about all of it. But the students I was dealing with were generally from British families in the Middle East. So I didn't have the cultural side of things to deal with because they were from a culture that I intrinsically understood.
Well,
So
yeah.
that was okay.
And that's really powerful. Hold on. That's really powerful for the student, that alignment, that you were sort of the voice of home for them when they're not at home, which is, I guess, what the expat experience sort of is.
Yes, yeah. And several of those students in the holidays come to the UK to visit family. So that helped with the relationship building because they were going to places that I might actually know a bit about. So it actually helped with the relationship building side of things. And I still have a dream that a couple of my students, that I will actually get to meet them in real life at some point. I'm really hoping that that's going to happen because that would just be wonderful. So I am still navigating this relationship to a certain extent, and it has improved somewhat by my decision to say, okay, just to make communications a bit easier, let's set up a group WhatsApp. So there's me, the student, and one or both parents, and so communication is easier, and we're actually developing a relationship that way, which is often helpful.
Fantastic.
And the parents pop into the calls occasionally as well,
Yeah.
which is also which is also great. Um,
Hold on a
I
second. Different means of communication. I know that WhatsApp and Google. I think Google isn't available in China. Is that right? Um, or Google, yeah, Google Docs. Certainly, you can't share through Google Docs. So again, and I'm sorry because I know I'm showing my ignorance here, but I do think that there's something about the different methods of communication, different platforms that are more native in different countries that is relevant here. So the fact that WhatsApp was a quick pickup for you is awesome. I know in the States they don't really like to use WhatsApp. They tend to use, I think, iMessenger, which we really don't use in the UK at all. Is it all right with you if I go to Mosin now?
Of course, absolutely.
Awesome, let's go. Mosin, go for it.
Well, I think for me, what it has been like, it's because see, when I started off, I actually straightforwardly went to more of international people, and it's just that because when I started
Sorry,
off,
Mosin,
I
I don't
was
want to
what
make any assumptions. Where are you based right now?
I'm based in Lahore, Pakistan, basically,
Thank you.
and yeah, so straightforwardly, when I remember when the first time an opportunity came up, I wasn't really looking for it. But then I think what helped me then and still now was probably the fact that the age factor wasn't a big difference. There wasn't a big age gap. So the culture that we pool of people were actually dealing with wasn't actually, I won't say a Muslim culture or Middle East culture or a UK culture. It was more of a Gen Z culture. So when we started,
Whoa! Oh
you
my
know,
gosh, that's fantastic.
yeah, so once I realized that I actually connect with them on those levels, that helped them. I'm sure it did because that was reflected in the grades. But that actually helped me personally a lot learn about how to, psychologically understand someone. So essentially, it's like you connecting on maybe the problems, the issues. For example, one of the worst things I remember still as part of my what you can say learning career is that if a teacher is not approachable, you don't really care if he has three PhDs. So that's one of the biggest things I realize it's there with every student. So once we connected on that level, I think that's something that worked the best. And only from there onwards, we actually started learning or really got to a fact that, okay, like what sort of culture do you really belong to? I mean, is it just the Facebook globalization culture or is it something else as well? So it's like, it's more of an amalgamation of cultures that I think now we live in, and we got to realize and accept that. And I think once you start accepting, it just becomes a lot easier for you as well as for the student to connect with each other. So I
Beautiful.
think my way of dealing with the whole cultural nuance has firstly come from my own experience because it's just that I've worked with a lot of people so far who don't really belong from my own culture, basically from very beginning. And then what happens is
Sorry,
that
wait,
when
wait, hold
I
on. What's that phrase? Don't really belong. Can you unpack that, please?
yeah, from don't really belong is like, for example, like I went to, so for example, like, all the fact that although I'm based in Lahore, but I went to a whole British curriculum. So essentially, from the British curriculum, when I go out on the streets, initially I wasn't very good with even the local language. I mean, it's kind of funny to hear, but it is what it is. So I learned that, and then by now I can delve very well in the British culture or the local one or the American one. So that was also a very good learning curve for me. And I thought that if I could make a student, I could put myself in a student's shoes and think how they'll be thinking, it just makes it easier for you to connect. And, just brush away all of these, cultural nuances that we have. So that's probably
Beautiful.
what my
There's
take
a
is.
little bit of chameleonism that you're describing there, right? That
I
you're
agree. Of
you're
course.
using your empathy to align with them
Of course, that's true.
and
That's
your
true.
life experience. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I think your point about Gen Z was fascinating. Alma,
And just one last thing, one
yeah, go
last thing
for
would
it.
quickly add up. And I think one thing which I've realized over the span of years, again from my own experience, is like um, it's very important to give everybody a due weightage, irrespective of the age that they belong from. So a lot of times when you start giving a child, if he says something, even if it's 15, 14, 20, 28, 32, whatever it is, I mean, you just give his point of view some weightage, even if it's bad, even if it's wrong. So once you recognize them, you start giving them that confidence. That helps you connect a lot with each other. So
It's
that's
very
that probably would
powerful.
be my last point.
That's very, very powerful. And of course, that goes way beyond, it transcends any sort of cultural differences. And is totally beautiful. And I'm curious to know whether it's accepted by every culture in the same way, that element of, I mean, we know that in the UK, kids have a heck of a lot of autonomy. And we know that it's not like that everywhere. And we don't necessarily know that it's a good thing here. I'm going to stop because I'm rambling. Alma, what are your thoughts?
I agree with a lot of the fact that we're connecting on a human level, regardless of where we all come from. So, and I feel like in terms of relating to an international audience, I felt, and probably still do to some degree, that I started off from the back foot. Being Romanian, moving to the UK at 19 and starting tutoring pretty much just before I turned 20, I was, apart from the last year and a half, I've been always working with families from a different culture to mine. Only in the last year and a half do I now have a student who's based in Romania who is actually studying for the IB. So we have a connection in terms of course, location, but also, primary school education and things like that. And then he's moved on to education in English, and I have experience with the IB. So we have a few more things in common in that sense. But starting tutoring in the UK, I was always feeling, sorry, my toddler is, you might hear him here and there.
That's fine. We like little people. You've seen mine around enough. Don't worry.
Yeah. So in the UK, I still feel that maybe Romanians don't always have the best reputation. So I felt like I had to show, the best, most professional side of me always. I still do, even regardless of the Romanian background. So that's helped in that sense. And in 2015, so a few years after I graduated and qualified as a secondary teacher, I started working with an agency that's called Tutors International. So kind of my tutoring career has been, or has required, that I'm flexible around people's background, like the background that they come with when we have our lesson, whether that's British, whether that's a traveling culture, whether that's, American, whether that's, I've worked with Germans and Italians, Spanish, Romanian now. The goal is always the same. The goal is to get the student more confident, do well, feel better about themselves or improve their grades. The goals are very, very similar. The way they achieve the goals can be cultural dependent, I think.
Tell me more. Tell me about the how.
So when you were talking about the dynamics between parents and tutors, it really is important to know if you're on level foot with the parents, if they're going to treat you as a professional or if they're going to treat you as an employee. And depending on culture, but also family culture, not necessarily, I can't just say, oh, all British families have treated me this way. No, it's quite individual. If you come from an equal footing, then they will listen to suggestions and they will take your opinion seriously, and they will take your advice seriously, implement it even, hopefully. And I'm talking here about, exam, for example, in terms of exams and needing more time or needing extra support or noticing something, or maybe even asking to have an educational psychologist be involved, that kind of thing. In a school setting, you have more gravitas, but if you as a lone tutor are not on equal footing, then parents might not take up that suggestion. And I've had it go both ways for sure in the culture where I was, considered a professional, and most recently with the job in person in the UK. That's happened actually just a few days ago, that I've suggested a few changes. And in other jobs, when I've worked with Russian families, it wasn't quite on level footing. I was the employee mostly. I suggested that maybe there's an educational psychologist that needs to be involved, and that was not taken seriously. The child was young, to be fair, so maybe it turned out okay. But I don't know. I won't know, I guess, because they won't be in touch because I was an employee at the time. So that extends beyond the tutoring contracts as well. The level footing, I mean, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's exactly where I was hoping we would get to. Dee, Mohsin, do you want to respond? Jenna, I don't know whether or not you're with us. Can you just let me know? Dee, what are your thoughts? Oh, you're on mute. That's okay. We're juggling.
I'm just fascinated hearing all
Yeah.
of these experiences because they're so different from anything that I've experienced. I mean, the only issues I've experienced culturally was through a tutoring business. I had a student, I think, from an Iranian family, and it was fairly apparent to me, even though I'm not formally qualified in assessing this, that he was almost certainly ASD. Um, um, and I continued to work with him, but I was struggling. I didn't feel fully equipped to help. So I reached out to the business to see if they'd actually had anything from the parents about this, and they said nothing at all. And just a little bit more investigation, and it was the child was an only child, and from the Iranian family, I'd since discovered that culturally it was unlikely that the ASD was actually going to be recognized, that they would want to recognize that was an issue.
Mohsin, can I call on you? Hold on. Just to speak about willingness to recognize neurodiverse issues.
Sorry, come again. I lost you. Can you please repeat?
So the question, so Dee is saying that with a student from Iran, did you say?
I think so, yeah.
She was doubtful that the student was going to have his neurodiverse needs explored and identified because of fear of stigma, I'm assuming. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's that like where you are and where you tutor, the approach to neurodiverse needs?
I agree. I think I totally agree with that. See, I think if I would probably build up on what Alma said, it's like a lot of times it's also, a cultural stigma that there is, but there's also a stigma related to a certain family that a person belongs to. Because we are actually now in a day and age where you might feel like that, okay, if someone's, let's say, is from UK, maybe they'll all be the same, but that's not always the case. A lot of time people feel like there's a certain stigma associated with something, and sometimes they don't. So yeah, so from where I am, or the tutor, the experience that I've had, they've been diverse. There are some people, let's say, who are like very sure about, okay, man, if you've got some issues, I mean, not really should be labeling them as issues. It's just that we have our own, goods and bads. So, you got to address them and, kind of focus on them. So, dealing with ADHD or depression or anything along those lines, it's good. Do that. But then again, there are some parts where this is still a stigma. Even where I belong from, this is still considered to be a stigma, and it's more of considered to be what you can say, a lack of focus on the right and more focus towards the negative rather than considering it as an actual need. If let's say you've got some I don't know, if you've got some issues going on, some neurodiverse things that you got to focus on, you should be focusing on. So yeah, it's like with my experience, it's like up and down. I mean, I cannot say that everybody is the same or everybody has a similar approach. It's like you find diverse people dealing with things in a diverse manner. So that's what I felt like. And being a tutor, since you, just like you started off and you mentioned that you got to go where they are, so you just got to try and deal with it. So someone who just says that he's not focused versus someone who says that, okay, he maybe has ADHD, you got to deal with both of them, given the fact that it might be any one of them, but you got to just deal with the left as well as the right. So I think that's the way to go by.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I feel like there's so much there that we need to factor in. That point about family is really profound, hey? Alma, what are your thoughts here?
I agree that culturally neurodivergence might be might have more stigma attached to it, depending on like for sure in Romania, for sure. There were generations that grew up without seeing anyone just unfortunately with physical disabilities. So people were, and I'm sure that's common knowledge across the world, and like the Romanian orphanage story and things like that. Horrendous history around that, unfortunately, but with a lasting legacy that, you know, we don't talk about things that are not quote unquote normal. We don't share our stories, you know, that people don't want necessarily any diagnoses around mental health. And I see that happening less with, especially with British families that I've come to work with, and now most recently, and that actually happened with the drama curriculum. There's a drama curriculum for AQA. There's a text that one of my students has to study, and you know, there's a transgender character in that text. And I feel that if I were to talk about it with any Romanian students or families or even friends, there's an automatic pushback. When I talk to the British families or British students, they take it a little bit better. The text is there, the curriculum is set, I'm not setting it. The exams are set, they have to study this text, they have to address these issues. But people are, you know, at various points in their willingness to just accept that this is reality. And I keep saying, my thinking is that just like every single thing that has come out to light, now might be the time where certain topics need to be spoken about more. And that's not going to stop the reality of them existing in the first place, whether that's neurodivergence, that's physical disability. Yes, that's right. My toddler
Amazing,
agrees.
amazing. I did not expect this to get so juicy so fast. Well, maybe I did. Jenna, we need to hear from you now. So Alma's just made a point. Did you catch what she was saying? Jenna? She's driving, but she's just unmuted, which means that she can speak. Go on. So let me sum up and you see if you can get the sound working. Go ahead and speak when you're ready. So Alma's saying that there's a set text with a transgender student in it in the drama AQA, and that addressing or, you know, working on a character who is transgender would be frowned upon in Romania and seems to be slightly more acceptable, more than slightly more acceptable in the UK, and certainly it's part of a UK-based curriculum. Jenna, go for it. Very frustrating. Do you go for it?
Yeah, I mean, even in the UK, you're going to have there's a, you know, a very disparate view about, you know, transgender issues. So even culturally, we might be more accepting of it. Individually, you might still encounter those barriers. But Jenna made a comment in the chat. Having a family, she says, terrified of the shame my neurodivergence would bring. And I think it's part of why I'm so open about it now and why I work so much in that area. And I hadn't even thought that might be a barrier. I mean, I've been informally diagnosed with some ASD, and I suspect some ADHD and some other stuff as well. And I do touch on it occasionally with my students to kind of explore things and to, you know, I try and, you know, explain what it does and how it affects things and how it affects my perspective on life, just part of the life skills coaching thing that I do. But I'd never thought that the fact that I have some neurodivergence, or as I prefer, neurominority aspects, that might actually impact the families in terms of their attitude to me, in terms of how they're working with me. Never thought
Very
about that
nice.
at all.
Very nice. Thanks for reflecting that back. Jenna, go and have another go.
Is it working?
Yes.
Yay! Oh,
Never
sorry
been so
about that.
happy to hear from you. Okay, I know you've got a lot to reflect back on now, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
points you've got personal experiences with. So we're going to give you some time and space to ramble. Go for it.
Thank you. So I think there's two main things coming out of this conversation, I think, that I haven't put back on really as much. It is the neurodivergence and that kind of cultural needs side of things, and that difference in relationship, but also the comment about the trans character in the set text. And I think for me, this is like, these are really big things for me, and these are things that I address a lot. I'm someone who is openly queer and openly neurodivergent, and I'm also, a person of color who has come from a background where these things, I didn't know what the word lesbian meant until I was like 13 and we did it at school. And I was diagnosed with neurodivergence quite young, but those diagnoses got buried and I never received any support, to the point where my family don't remember any of it ever happening as a child. And I think it's definitely something that affects my relationships with families, and has done for my whole career. And it's a really interesting mix now, being someone who has, been tutoring for coming up to 20 years, compared to what it was like for me when I was starting out, and that difference. Because one of the changes is that for most of my career, I wasn't a full-time tutor. It was something I did on the side while I ran an LGBT mental health charity in London. And I think that sometimes now families choose me because of that background, because of my experiences, and that I am someone who has these experiences and shouts it from the rooftops. I go into Parliament and talk about these things. I go around the world and talk about these things. And I think that it's really hard to kind of know the right answers and the right way of addressing these things. With the trans character, it's such a hard thing, even in the UK, to have in there, and the conversations around it, and the different reactions in different schools, and the different ways it's taught, and the different support in place for different teachers and tutors. And I think that one of the challenges of the tutoring side of it is kind of something that goes across so many different areas, is that we can often feel quite isolated, and we don't necessarily feel like we have that backing that you have in a school. Like Alma was talking about, sometimes you are the employee, and you're a lone employee so often, even where you are employed in a household where they have several tutors, or, for example, I've done governessing and head governessing, and you're the person coordinating those tutors. It's still that you're an employee and you're employed by people whose background most likely isn't in education, that isn't in inclusion, that isn't in child development. And that can make that really challenging as well, in and of itself, with all of these things. And I think that for me personally, my particular brand of neurodiversity is very chaotic. I have all these big ideas, and I struggle with the executive function often. And I think that for me, I'm also in a weird age bracket where families often still see me as a young person, but have a lot of those, even when they won't admit it. Sometimes there's a bit of a balance of whether my chaos makes me seem inexperienced and disorganized and potentially a little bit less professional, or I'm a polymath, so I know lots of different things, and my subject expertise is really broad and across subject categories, which has its own issues, that people think that means they take the first half of that phrase, that saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none," and sometimes that can make them feel like, oh, you know, you're someone who needs looking after because I also have physical health conditions, and that infantilizing, is that how that's pronounced? Can prove its own barriers in that kind of way. And I think there's loads of elements there that cross over different things for different tutors, right? That we all have something that changes that power balance with our clients, and over time there are things that can affect that power balance, and the way that we communicate expectations and the way that we have reluctances and stuff. Like in some cultures you do not talk about money, you do not set your prices, and you get paid when you get paid and how much you get paid. In others it's like the first thing, it's the main thing, and nothing else really matters, or everything else is secondary. And I mean, it's really, really interesting on that level, and how all of these things and what kind of role looks like. Like for some tutors, the role is really clear and defined. You're there to go in, really, really separate to school, really, really separate to life. You're just there to pop in, not be part of anything, not integrate into anything, just get those grades, get that work done, and kind of walk away every day, or however often, once a week. And I think that there's a lot there that, like,
There's a lot there.
yeah. And I think it comes down to what you want that relationship to be, and what you need it to be, and what your families need it to be.
That's right. That's exactly what I've just put in the chat there, reflecting on what you're saying, is that it seems to be that it comes down to, can you deliver what they want and need? So there's an understanding of what they want and need, an understanding of what it is that you can deliver, and then an alignment of the two that we're really looking at here, which is what we're always looking at. And maybe the upshot of this conversation is, if you've got your clarity, then the cultural differences just drop to the wayside. Mohsin, what are your reflections here as we begin to wrap up?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to add that, I mean, I think I absolutely love what Jenna's doing, and you know, the way all of this has been taken care of. So I just want to say more power to you, and I hope you know, it turns out to be the best. That's one. And number two is that um it's like, you know, again, I think my bit, what I've learned is, I think it has to be about learning to accept and learning to communicate. I mean, for example, now maybe it's a very different story from all of you. So just like someone who's maybe trans and they would not like knowing that there is some part where there still is not acceptable. Very similarly, I mean, think about anybody growing up, let's say in a Muslim family or anything on the lines. And when you go on and see not just the syllabus, but a lot of movies or anything online, and you find the bad guys, and they're like, what? They're Muslims. And a lot of times, a lot of my students, I mean, I talk about it very openly. I'm like, I mean, I'm very open to discussing terrorism and all of this because I feel like it has to be done. A lot of times happens during the classes as well. Sometimes they're like kind of, I can see that a student wants to ask something and they want to ask, okay, how is it like? And I'm like, I try to jump into that conversation and feel like that, okay, let's have this conversation. So I feel like, again, I think we got to learn to communicate. I mean, it's like, uh, I mean, it's like it's a paradox that we're living in. We're so connected together, kind of, apparently, but at the same time, I feel like we're the least connected because we don't talk. So we got to communicate. We got to learn. You know, my part of the story. So for me, I don't know. When you talk about neurodivergence, if you would ask me what my trauma is actually growing up in all of this happening, you know? And my trauma is probably thinking about, okay, if I go out, I don't have to defend myself on my degree. I don't have to defend myself on how smart or good I am. I don't have to defend myself on maybe I'm working for 7 days a week since the past, I don't know, 2 years. I got to firstly go on and clarify the fact that I don't belong to that school of thought. I mean, so that kind of changes the whole game for me. And maybe Jenna maybe feels kind of similar, you know, if you're a person of color or if you're maybe a trans person, or I don't know. So again and again, so it's all going to settle down to the idea. I mean, that's my thought, is if we collectively try to lay a foundation, we're all different and we're all the same. Let's learn to communicate. If we can do that together as a community, I think that helps us connect a lot with the students. So that's what I try to do with all my students as well, because I want to make the conversation go back to, tutoring. So that's what it is. Give them the weightage. They're going to do bad. They will do bad. I mean, nobody's perfect. I'm not, none of us is. So let's actually communicate. I mean, that's what it is, and accept. It's fine.
Unbelievable. Thank you. It seems that what this conversation has really done is allow us to explore our own cultural nuances as tutors, right? How we show up, how we're perceived, what, Alma used that phrase that she feels like she's on the back foot or had done originally. And mostly that you feel that your students want to ask something, want to say something. And the ways in which your specializations, your MA, Jenna's experience, balance out the assumptions that our students and their families may be making, and how those give us a standing to go out into the international world. And therefore maybe, hold on a second, please, 5 minutes. And therefore maybe what we're talking about here is creating a more solid foundation on which to build our understanding with students. Absolutely compassionate, but also, what does good look like? So yesterday, so in addition to having one who's now at home full time, I have one who is currently applying to the top sixth form in the country. I've got one of everyone in my house at the moment. So we went to this open evening last night, and it's a school that requires 4 A levels. All the students have to take 4 A levels, and the entry requirements are all 8s and 9s at GCSE. But beyond that, there's no interview. There's no personal statement. They don't want you to give you a photo. They don't want any context for who you are. If you're a person who wants to perform at this academic level, then they'll take you if they can take you. And I thought that was so interesting because of all the things that they weren't factoring in. Because really what they were just looking at was your attitude to learning. If you, and the kids who stood up to speak, the sixth formers who stood up to speak, they were like, it's just that learning's really, cool here. And that was their shared language. So I think it might be interesting to reflect on shared languages. Alma, you mentioned when you talked about your students that always there's this need to build confidence, build a sense of self. Mohsin was nodding the whole time you were saying that, because wherever we are in the world, we know that really we need to build up young people. What that looks like might be different, but for them to be a functioning generation, we need to build them up. And in order to do that, we need to build ourselves up, which is why it was so fascinating that we went from Alma's point about transgender to Jenna's reflection on herself and the way she shows up for her families, and then the way Mohsin feels that he may be on the back foot and need to assert himself and to clarify. And really it all comes down to alignment. It comes down to an alignment of intention between what we want to deliver and what they want to receive or achieve. Shared language is so important, and it's what makes a society and identity. Thank you, Jennifer, for reiterating that. I think that what Mohsin said before about Gen Z, is it Gen Z? Is it Z?
That's just Gen Z.
My gen doesn't even know which gen we are. We were before gens.
Let's not go into how Gen Z shows up in different countries. There's a delay also, Julia.
Come on, you've got 1 minute. Speak fast.
Me, I was gonna say that from the perspective of a parent, I have much more empathy now. So that's also factored in, and I love being a parent.
I think since you get married, Alma.
Not for me to say, but from my personal experience, it was really hard to empathize with my students' parents. And then, you know, you kind of connect with the kids more so, but now I feel like, yes, I'm there too. I see how I know my student, my son is
Hey, we
saying
like little
no.
people.
I can definitely see every parent wants the best for their kids. And now we're just talking in general, right? We're not talking about abusive situations, things like that. But in general, the people we work with, they want the best, whether they think that's employing someone or working collaboratively or putting the teacher on a higher pedestal, that it really depends. But generally it comes from the same place. So I have that lens to draw
That was
from now.
beautiful,
which I
beautiful
like.
way to sum up. Because as we said before, we're looking at respectful relationships, and those are built on understanding that, you know, we're trying to do the right thing. The parents are trying to do the right thing and being able to build empathy there. Dee, would you agree that that was thoroughly juicy?
Wow, I wasn't even going to come today. I'm so glad that I turned up, because this has been awesome. And that final point of Alma's started to resonate with me, because I am, you know, in my late 50s, having never had kids of my own. So the whole relating to teenagers, I couldn't do it as a classroom maths teacher, and it's something I've subsequently learned by working with children of that age, and in my previous jobs, and some of the trauma that I've been through, the grief that I've encountered, has kind of stretched those muscles that I haven't actually been able to exercise through actually the whole raising a family thing. And I've kind of done it in other ways, but the empathy is so important, and I've just kind of got there by a very, very different route.
Beautiful, beautiful. I feel like we started with what, and then we got to why, and then this how. This empathy is like the key tool here. Shared languages. I'm going to wrap up because I always finish on time. You guys are awesome. This is going to be a fantastic podcast and be chopped up into lots of insightful little snippets that are going to go on social media. If you were following us on LinkedIn, well done. I hope you got something from it, and I will see you guys again soon. Thank you, Mohsin. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Alma. Thank you, Jen.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.